Welcome to the Nicky Hughes Show, the place where we unearth pure gold in everyday stories. I'm Nicky, your host, and each week I bring you compelling conversations with real people that inspire, inform, and connect. Whether we're diving into the dynamic world of business with business briefs, exploring the mindset of champions with sports shorts, or celebrating the unsung heroes in local legends, this is your space for powerful, impactful stories from remarkable individuals. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's get started. Kimble Willis, owner of Arrowbow, all the way from sunny New Zealand. How are you, and what do you do?
Hello, Nicky. Yes, that's right. I am Kimble, and I live in New Zealand. I'm based in Auckland, in New Zealand, and I am the founder and principal advisor at Arrowbow, which is a sales performance accelerator business based in Auckland, but working with B2B industrial and agribusiness companies who have a sales problem. And I am really that person to come in and diagnose what's going on and start to work with those companies to enable them to reach not only their sales potential, but also their business potential and really achieve their goals that they're looking to achieve.
So a sales performance accelerator, unpick that for us. What does that mean?
Okay, so we have three main sales programs, and I'm all about turning your sales potential into sales performance. So sales is can be a really complicated and daunting role that people play within their business, but it's a critical business function. If we're not generating revenue and ultimately margin, then we're really going to struggle to be able to initially reinvest in our business and grow the business to the levels that we're looking to grow it at. So ours is all about sales performance, winning those deals that you deserve to win, and playing in a field of the market that enables your value proposition for your product or service to really accelerate. And hence the name, Sales Performance Acceleration. We have three main programs, if you want me to touch into those areas.
Yeah.
And our Sales Accelerator program really looks at across 6 key sales performance pillars. So we take a baseline assessment of their sales strategy. So what direction of travel, where they're playing, ideal customer profile, those types of elements of their sales effort. Their sales structure. So what are the structural elements that they have across their sales performance? Things like a sales process, right? And the other areas of sales structure that enable them to be really effective. We look at their current skill base. We look at their people performance, so actually the team that they have established and how they're operating today, and whether that sales design is the right fit. Culture, and obviously, any business is going to be underperforming if the cultural element isn't really fine-tuned and enabled. And the final area that we look at is technology. So a key part of sales enablement is technology, and making sure that the technology that they have across their sales effort is really fit for purpose, and probably more to the point, not over-engineered. So and really what our approach here is doing a deep dive diagnostic into the sales technology area and understanding what's already in place and what could be complementary or refined to enable them to be more effective. And then we go on a journey. It's a real journey. That Sales Accelerator program is more can be aligned to a shorter, more condensed, what I call a sprint, a 3-month sprint, or we could lay it out for a longer period of time, such as 12 months. So that's really our flagship program, Nicky, is the Sales Accelerator.
Okay, so Kimble, on the podcast in more recent episodes, we've talked to a lot of young entrepreneurs operating in the digital space, and they obviously have a much different sales process than what you're talking about. So I'm trying to
understand at what level business are you working with? Large corporates? Are you working with smaller businesses? Are you working with something in between? So who's your target market?
I've had a really sort of broad spectrum of those clients, but really one of my key areas of focus has been to really narrow it down around who are those ideal, what is that ideal customer profile for Arrowbow and for our current stage in the life cycle. And if I think about that startup, growth, mature and declining journey of a life cycle, we're really in that growth phase. I've worked across really all of those spectrums at the moment, from a startup through to a small to medium-sized enterprise and the larger corporates. But I certainly feel with where we're positioned at the moment, Nikki, is to be aligned to probably medium-sized businesses. So I call medium, smaller businesses probably $1 million in revenue less per year. And really where we're targeting our audience to be is in that $2 to $10 million of revenue at this stage. So probably the medium-sized organization. We're really operating primarily in the B2B space, so business to business. So our customers being businesses that on-sell to businesses rather than consumer, and saying that we have done some work with smaller retailers who are operating in the B2C or business to consumer space. So, but predominantly industrial and really agribusiness in the B2B area, and companies that are looking to take their products or services to the global marketplace. So New Zealand being an export-driven market, we're really looking to support and empower those organisations and businesses to really penetrate into those key export markets. And obviously sales strategy is such a key part of that. So the world's a big place, and actually being really clear on who they're going after and what markets they're going after and how.
Yeah. And again, just referencing the entrepreneurial businesses that we've spoken to in the past, they were very much all about lead generation. They were very much setting out their garden for the butterflies to come and settle on the flowers. However, you seem to be at you're targeting a different part of the sales process. So you're almost working with customers who have an established customer base or are seeking to having an established customer base, and you're looking at closing sales, is it, rather than attracting new leads and new business?
Really a combination of those, and I see the sales effort being a combination of your inbound, I use the terminology inbound and outbound sales effort. So absolutely lead generation is a critical part. So if I step back a little bit, the sales process is what I describe as the engine room of a sales effort. Having a repeatable, consistent process that the sales team can all reference and apply on a daily and weekly basis is absolutely fundamental to sales success. So, and that normally starts with lead generation. So actually attracting in those leads that are a good fit for your organization. And I like to use the terminology of flipping the funnel. The traditional sales funnel has a big, wide open mouth, and most organizations like to have lots of leads landing into the top of that funnel and then moving through your sales cycle, right, or your sales pipeline as quickly as possible. What happens is they get into the thick end or the wide end of the sales funnel, and then they fall down and you start to have some engagement. But actually what happens when they get to the narrow end of the spout, we realize that they aren't a good fit. And often sales teams are looking at that point and saying, hey, what's going on with this opportunity? And it's simply they're not aligned on value. They don't have a need. They don't have any desire. There's no urgency. There's no money, or whatever that reason is. Generally, there's 5 reasons why sales won't progress. And ultimately, they're not a good fit for us, right? So if we flip the funnel and get the narrow end at the top and get our ideal customer profile through that narrow end and have really good engagement and discovery and align on our solutions and needs, then we can expand once we've got them through. And it's all about depth and breadth and really expanding across our products and services, having really good fit. So yeah. So hey, look, and I go back to the inbound and outbound terminology, Nikki. And with regards to that, the lead nurture is how do we attract? So what is that attraction element? They're looking at us online and social context, social media platforms, and obviously LinkedIn's a key platform for the B2B operators. It's really it's got such wide breadth. I think there's something like 700 or 800 million members on LinkedIn globally. So, how are they seeing you, hitting your website, seeing you in a social network? Maybe you're part of a networking group, or you're a part of other industry organizations or clubs or societies in where you live, but also in a global context. So they're seeing you and they're getting referred to you. And that's the attraction part. So it's your inbound effort. And then what do you do with that lead once it's landed? And that's the lead nurture part. So then your sales process starts to spin from there. Obviously qualifications are a massive part of that as well. So as you're getting them through the narrow end of the funnel, are they a good fit for you? So that's really the qualification stage. And then your sales process flows from there. And then
how do you know what your ideal customer profile is? What is the process like to arrive at your ICP, ideal customer profile, and how do you assist with that effort?
What I like to do with clients or customers that we work with is go through a process where we have a framework that enables them to identify those characteristics that do make up their ideal customer profile. So really workshopping that process, questioning, challenging, asking really great questions that enable them to really line up and understand what that ideal customer profile looks like. Where I like to start is, and I tend to say this to people I'm working with, is think about your best customer today or a customer that you've worked in the past and identify the characteristics that they demonstrated when they worked with you. Were they engaged? Did they have strong values? Were they playing in the right market sector? Were their needs clear and aligned? What is their size? Even things like, are they a good payer, right? So are they paying the bills on time? All of those elements, all of those characteristics make up your ideal customer profile. Now, for me, if I think about the Arrowbow ideal customer profile, if I extend that a little bit further, part of that is I do have a defined sales team size that I like to think of, and also where they have a sales leader who's been in the role for not a great period of time, because being a sales leader, a sales manager, or a sales director, whatever that role is, that's such a big shift from being a salesperson. And often you land in a sales leader role and you don't have a clue on how to suddenly manage people, right? You've gone from managing a sales book to managing people. So that's part of it. So typically a sales leader who's been enrolled for less than 6 months is an attractive proposition to Arrowbow, because we can work with that leader to really accelerate their performance. The other part too is where they have under supported or in terms of sales capability. So they haven't invested behind sales capability. And as I mentioned right at the start, it's a real journey and it's a continuous learning process. That whole sales journey of salespeople. So
yeah. In diagnosing the potential customers that you're working with, I know that when you and I started out in our careers, the mode of operation for young salespeople was to receive a set of keys and a car and say, right, off you go. In fact, we didn't have any phones, any computers, anything. So are sales leaders more intentional about their onboarding of sales teams today than they were way back then? Or do you still see big gaps in how young salespeople are onboarded?
Well, you get a really wide cross-section of capability in that area. Some organizations are very good. Others do have quite poor capability in that area. But the intent's always there. It's not until they bring a salesperson on and they find they need to onboard them and actually they haven't been descriptive enough. And I was just having this conversation with a customer this morning around actually having processes and systems in place that enable you to be really effective when you bring that onboarding on. So I've seen really good organizations that have great onboarding processes, and some organizations will say, or some businesses will not actually let the person go out. And I like to use the terminology helping buyers buy rather than sell. So they won't go and help the buyers buy until maybe 6, 8, 10 weeks into the journey, right? So they're actually giving them a really solid onboarding. They're making sure they're really clear on the value proposition. They understand their way of selling. They've got really good understanding around the rigors of the sales process. So actually understanding those stages, and they can role play that with their sales leader, ideally. So, I mean, that's kind of the perfect onboarding. A lot of businesses these days even are leveraging technology where they have those online modules. So it's not necessarily human to human. It's probably a little bit of a hybrid of that, whereby, there's some online learning modules that they can do in their own time. But also, a great sales leader will be connecting with their salespeople, certainly when they're starting out, probably, absolutely daily, but, as they grow into their role, having really good one-on-ones, and that's part of the structural piece I talked about at the start as well. So having really good cadence around their sales leadership capability, and that includes one-on-ones, that includes role plays, that includes things like a ride-along. Sales leader might actually go and attend a sales call with an understanding customer to say, hey, look, I'm just here in an observation capacity. So all of those elements make up really good due diligence as a sales leader and bringing that new salesperson into the fold.
Are great salespeople born, or are they developed? And let's debunk that particular argument.
Well, for me, sales performance highly correlated to human performance, and human performance is coachable.
Okay, so that's interesting. So if we look at human performance, so what you're saying is that human performance outside of the sales environment is a key contributor to the performance inside the sales environment.
Yeah. And I like to think of, I like to look at the characteristics of those high performers, right? And what are those meta and physical elements that make up high performance? Look at I was just using the analogy today of say, Michael Jordan, right? So where they had the skill sets and they had the structure, but they also had the mindset to be really successful. Michael Jordan just backed himself to win every game, and that was the mindset he went onto the table with, and we can instill that in our sales team, right? And you've got to be pretty resilient as a salesperson. Even if you had a conversion rate of say 70% of your sales effort, and I like to think of that not necessarily from a lead, but maybe from that first discovery call where you've done some type of qualification through to closing. If your conversion rate's at 65 or 70%, you're losing still 30% of the time, right? So resilience is such a key part of sales, right? So I'd love to hear if anyone's ever won 100% of deals in their sales career. I highly doubt that that's the reality. And so, we can really coach and train. I like to think of sales as where art meets science. So there's a real art element in terms of human connection, and it's about building trust and rapport with your customer. And you do that in a natural way, right? And that trust is earned, and that's the human element. But then there's a science behind it, things like persuasive language, things like really good questioning. One of the areas that I see a lot with salespeople is that they get everything's going swimmingly well across the first 30 minutes of a sales meeting, and then suddenly the customer comes in with a couple of objections, and they're like a rabbit in the headlights, right? And it's like, oh, what do I do here? And they don't know what to do. And if you've preempted that, if you've done the planning, if you've done a role play perhaps with your sales leader, get the sales leader to ask you that objection, and then how you're going to handle it. And so that's the human element. That's the coaching, the bit that can be coached, where you can be really well prepared and with really good structure around expecting that question to be asked and then having a really good answer for it, or at least being able to take that question, that maybe that question away if you don't have the answer immediately, but actually manage it in a I guess, a structured way. And and one of the other key parts, obviously, is we need to be adapting to the customer preference. So we can't just roll down and play our music and play our tune. And we need to be doing things like thinking about our language, our body language, our tone, modulation, speed of delivery. You know, if you're engaging with someone whose English is the third language, and I'm an English speaker, and they're not, then I need to understand that, right? And that they might take a little bit more time to comprehend what I'm trying to tell them. So simplifying that language, speaking in, let's call it layman's terms, or if I'm speaking to someone really technical, actually giving them the technical information that they want. If someone's really data-driven, really analytical, then I'm going to react very differently with them, or I'm going to be engaging with them differently versus, say, someone who's really a driver who just wants, what's the next action, what is the next thing we're going to do together, versus someone that needs the data to make those decisions. So one of the key traits of high performance salespeople is really being able to adapt to that customer preference.
Yeah. Talk to me about personality, because the old perceived wisdom was that if you've got a good personality, if you get on well with people, you'll be a good salesperson, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
It's all about matching and mirroring and really aligning to those styles. So, you know, I just mentioned a couple of different types, right? The analytical and perhaps the driver. The driver just wants outcomes. The driver wants to move quickly. They're not so interested in having some small talk at the start of the conversation. You know, they're probably not that interested in the family. They're probably not that interested in what your hobbies were at the weekend. You know, they just want to get on with business because they're busy and they've got things to do, right? And hence the driver. We're just driving for outcomes. Whereas someone that's more analytical is going to be more considered with their decision making, and they need proof points, right? So we talked about data quickly. Or maybe someone is empathetic, right? There's a personality type that's empathetic. You might need to spend 15 or 20 minutes understanding how their garden's going. You know, what I like to do is find out what their passion is. So it's something I tap into my CRM against that contact record and say, hey, look, got an amazing customer, Sue, who works at company X, and she loves her garden. So what I'll do is I'll make a point when I go in and do my preparation for that sales meeting, is I'll see that Sue loves her garden, and I'll make sure that I've got a question in there about what's going on in her garden at this time of year. So then she's comfortable, right? So it's all about connection. It's all about understanding. I mean, that's all very natural stuff. I love gardening too, right? So finding those commonalities that enable us to build that trust and rapport is really important. So, and going back to your original question, is we need to match up to the type of person that we're dealing with, and they'll vary, right? You'll have a driver, you'll have someone who's very empathetic, you'll have someone that's more analytical, right across the customer spectrum. So you're really needing to wear a few different hats at different times.
You spoke about CRM, and for a lot of sales teams and a lot of what I would describe as individual contributor salespeople, the whole notion of CRM sends shivers down their spine. The thoughts of having to take notes in a customer's office and record all of the detail of the conversation and write down the address and customer preferences, that for a lot of traditional salespeople is a complete nightmare. So you obviously help teams and individuals on that transition to understand the value of that data and to help them build out their CRM. Is that a key part of what you do?
Yeah,
also?
Absolutely. You know, it's all about being more efficient. So the one thing we're all probably short on is time, right? And one thing we can't get back is time. And I think famous war generals talked about time and space, and they weren't so concerned about space because they could get space back. If they lost a bit of ground, they can regain that ground. But if they lost time, then they had major concerns going on, right? So it's all about efficiency with the resources that you have. And admittedly, CRMs have probably got a bit of a bad rap in terms of their journey, but they've really evolved. And I see it as a key tool for successful high performance sales, selling, sales teams to be using a CRM that's really well suited for them. I had an example last week, actually. Someone said to me just straight off the discovery call, they said, "What's the best CRM for me, Kimble?" And I said, I can't give you the answer to that today. We need to sit down and understand what you've already got in place. But I would say, a lot of those initial enterprise customer resource management or CRM tools that were in place were really driven for management reporting. And I've seen in my 25 years of selling that there's been a real evolution, and probably we're at CRM 3.0 now, where they're actually, and particularly some of those mid-range, what I would call mid-range CRMs, and don't get me wrong, the landscape is very busy. There's a hell of a lot of CRMs out there, but there's a few CRMs that are in that mid-range that are really effective at driving greater customer and sales efficiency across the sales team. And they really work for the salesperson. I've already given you a couple of examples, having your pipeline in there, having your customer and contact records, having all of the correspondence. A lot of them just bolt in your inbox these days, so it's all happening in the background. So it's not repeating a lot of that information, but all of that customer information is being captured in one place. So I do see it as a key tool. And something, things like dictation, right? So we can actually just dictate, and that can all just be slammed straight into the CRM when it's well managed. So it doesn't have to be this big, cumbersome tool that has traditionally been seen as sales teams as a hindrance.
Yeah. Just want to loop back to the sales capability piece just for a moment and talk about the things that hold people back in their sales career. Now, if I go back to my early days in sales, I worked for some great organizations with some terrific sales training programs and so on. We used to bring in Zig Ziglar from the States and other people to carry out sales training and so on. And I remember in particular one sales leader who was a particularly good salesperson himself, but struggled with that whole people management piece that you talked about. However, his way of getting us G'd up and motivating us was to bring in today's newspaper, and he'd start whacking it off the table, and he'd go, "Today's going to be a great day. It's going to be an amazing day. It's going to be wonderful sales," and so on. And he'd try and hype us up in that way, which is fine. So again, the older perceived wisdom was the secret to selling is to turn a negative into a positive. However, what I noticed at that time was that that's fine, and you can get people into a state of action through these various forms that they used. However, sometimes it actually masked over the real issues and the real things that were holding people back, like limiting beliefs and so on, which are so very prevalent in the sales community. So how do you get into the nitty gritty of that, and how do you get into the science of selling, and how deep do you go with sales teams?
Well, absolutely. I sort of see three key areas. And firstly, you're dead right. Like sales, you've got to be, mindset's such a key thing, right? So having a positive mindset and having a growth mindset is really important. I talked about resilience earlier. So those that aren't that resilient are going to get feeling, unless they can let a loss be a bit like water off a duck's back, it's really going to impact them. And it's really about, use the terminology, get back on the horse and let's go again. Sales is really a numbers game, but we've got to give ourselves the best opportunity each time we put ourselves in front of the customer. I like to use a terminology. I got coached in terms of the terminology of an advance, right? So you think about a sales cycle from nurturing that initial lead through to closing, and then following up, and I'll talk about referrals. That's a key part, because actually your next best customer will typically be known by your existing customer base. So really important. But ultimately, that journey is vitally important for us to make sure that we're performing really well across that whole cycle. And all of the data that sits out there suggests the faster a sales moves through a sales cycle, the more successful you're going to be, right? So being prepared, making sure that we're seeking those advances. So every single customer interaction is vital. whether it be the salesperson that's owning the account, whether it be the sales operation team that's doing the execution, whether it's being the sales leader that dips in and has a customer meeting with you, whether it be a C-suite senior business leader that might be visiting the region who want to come and meet the customer. All of those are really important engagements. And how we make those effective is that we're really well planned and prepared, and everyone understands the role and responsibility that we're going to play in those customer engagements. So having ownership, the other thing too is you'll see a natural bell curve distribution across the sales team of the low through to the good performers and then the high performers. And those high performers typically have really thought in and narrowed down on a few key areas, right? And it's the structures that they have, the key sales structures that they're applying, and doing that really diligently and learning that continuous learning growth mindset. Like if you fail, let's jump back up and have another go, right? And actually learn from doing those reviews to understand why that might not work quite so well. Having the skill set, and that's the selling skills, actually, being able to build rapport and trust and communicating and using persuasive language and great questions and handling objections with poise and just being really confident it's a value exchange, right? Sales is a value exchange. So I've got a good or service or a product or service that I'm hopefully helping the buyer to buy, and that's got to be value in there for them. So actually, if they were to buy that, how's that going to help them? How's that either going to help them create value or solve a problem that they currently have in their business? And if we go in with that mindset, then you're going a long way towards enabling successful sales. And I talked about aligning to our customer preference, right? The most successful salespeople really align to the customer preference and can connect at that level. So they've built trust and rapport. Don't try and sell too early. That's the other thing. Don't try and jump to a solution too early. Take your time to really understand. That discovery phase is so important. And then the lower performers are typically not doing a lot of that stuff, right? Oh, the other thing is mindset. So actually having that growth mindset and having confidence that on the table, if you don't believe in what you're selling, be it a product or service, you're really going to put yourself on the back foot as well. So, your low performers are probably not doing most of those things that the high performer's doing. I'll just jump in quickly. The high performer can be as much trouble as the low performer across the sales team.
Yeah. Yes.
Because typically they want to remain at the top of the leaderboard. They're holding everything to their chest and they're not that collaborative. So it's really about unpicking a bit of that and enabling or encouraging that high performer to really come in and collaborate and support the good and low performers, and what I call dragging everyone towards the right or everyone towards high performance. Yeah.
Where did you learn all this?
It goes back to, skill set, structures, and mindset really are the three key elements that make up high performance.
Okay. Where did you learn all this?
25 years. I'm an avid reader. I like to learn from experience. I've really played quite a few different roles in my. I was very lucky to have a career in a primary industry in New Zealand, and I started off as a sales rep, which was really quite transactional. Moved into account management where I really needed to be solution selling because it was a little bit more complicated. I've held BDM roles, business manager roles. I've done some strategy and marketing work, some project-based work, things like the reseller program at Fonterra, where we actually, started to monetize our reseller relationships. So just picking up from my experience really, and then into regional account management, sales leadership. So as a sales director, and then luckily enough as a regional sales coach. So kind of had to learn that stuff as I went along. But also I had some great trainers. I noticed you mentioned Zig Ziglar, and some fantastic quotes from Zig Ziglar, right, in terms of sales and sales performance.
Yeah. My favorite one is in every negative situation, no matter how bad, there is the seed of an equal or greater positive. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so you obviously worked for large corporations, and was that all in New Zealand, or was it overseas? And that was clearly a good career path, or perceived good career path. What drove you to leave that, and why aren't you still there?
Yeah, so I had about 19 or 20 years in the working in largely sales capacity at Fonterra, and yeah, that journey was fantastic. The first 7 or 8 years of that was New Zealand-based, domestic-based sales. Initially at Kiwi dairies, but then into Fonterra, so looking after the New Zealand domestic market. With us being a large exporter of the goods that we provide to the global marketplace, you know, a lot of travel sort of came about through that. I had 3 years as what the terminology was business manager, but it was really end-to-end management of our colostrum business, and that really ignited the opportunity to travel and go and see some of those key markets. So the end markets, I did act in a sales capacity in that role, so working with account managers across our regions, but really focused in on China, North Asia, and Southeast Asia at that point in time, but also had the opportunity to work across Europe and North America. So that was an awesome opportunity. And then eventually, I over a few more years in a few different roles, I worked with the cheese business for a while. I did the strategy in the Middle East, and I just got exposed to those global markets, and an opportunity came up to work in Singapore. So I had 5 years in Singapore as sales director, and the last 3 years of that was I sort of double-headed the role as a regional sales coach for the wider region, which included actually some of those territories I've just mentioned. So sort of the Greater China region, Southeast Asia, and the wider North Asia sales teams. So coaching Fonterra programs and training systems across the sales network. So I had about 100 well, possibly 70 or 80 salespeople across that region, and working with those individuals to really upskill their capability. So long story short, 2018 came back to New Zealand. Actually, my kids were I've got 2 teenagers, and they were sort of heading into secondary school. And yeah, so I made a decision to come back to New Zealand at that point in time. Had another year with Fonterra in the sales capability space. And eventually, after about 8 or 9 restructures, I got restructured out, which was it was a big shock, actually. I always looked at restructures, and for me, it was always an opportunity. I always looked at them as an opportunity. It was a positive thing that was happening to the business. They were happening for a reason. And ultimately, I guess either through my performance or my relationships or the need for my ongoing services within the organization, I don't want to use the term survived, but I was lucky enough to get a role in those new structures. And they happened pretty regularly, to be honest. They were happening sort of every 18 months or so. And I always looked at them and I thought, right, well, there's people in this organization smarter than me that know that this is the right structure. Let's put our best effort forward. And but ultimately that came to an end in 2019. So I then looked at other opportunities, and so for the last 5 years I've been in the consulting space. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And sales leadership, using some of those skills that I've learned.
Yeah. The old phrase is never waste a good restructure. It's there's always opportunity in there. Kimble, it hasn't all been plain sailing for you, has it? I mean, you've obviously had a very great career, and now you're well into your career as an entrepreneur as well. And from the outside looking in, it looks as though you've had a phenomenally successful run at this. However, there have been some personal challenges along the way as well. Can we talk about that a little bit and maybe just outline the journey that you've been on in that respect?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share a little bit on that, Nikki, and probably more at a high level, but just recognizing that sometimes things aren't always as they seem, and I really went on a journey where ultimately you've probably heard the terminology of rock bottom. What I would describe as my rock bottom kind of hit me in 2018, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't like what I saw. that was probably the best way to describe it. I was functioning okay. I was holding on to my position, but I probably wasn't at my best across that sort of those latter years, sort of 10 years or so, where I felt myself in decline, and largely in my mental capacity to be actually really engaged and really performing at my best. And without going into too much detail, I realized on the back of some comments from other people that I needed some help, and I was prepared to be vulnerable enough at that point, and sort of across 2017, 2018, to kind of put my hand up and say, hey, yeah, this isn't really working. And ever since that time, and what ultimately I did through that period, Nikki, was I found my people, and I found my people that had similar experience to me. And for me, that looks like a 12-step program, and it's been amazing. I've now got a loving sponsor who I can share all of my everything that's going on in my life, and we connect on a really regular basis. I feel like my life's turned around 180 degrees from where I was at that time in 2018 to where I am today. And I was 44 at the time. I'm now just turned 50. And for me, I see my life in two parts. I've had that journey, which I've described a little bit of, particularly around my sales career. But now I've got this opportunity now to really take the second half of my life and live it to the fullest, and it's just been amazing, the transformation for me. I got quite unhealthy too through that period, so I was certainly overweight. I got to well into the 120 kgs in terms of size, and I didn't like it, right? And that was on the back of having some personal habits that weren't serving me very well. And so I went on this weight loss journey too, and for me that involved exercise, and I learned that exercise and nutrition and all of those key elements. I read so much about that. I asked a lot of questions. I started running. I started walking. Actually, a fellow colleague of mine said to me, "Oh, would you like to walk home?" I was in Singapore. "Would you like to walk home rather than catching the bus one night?" And I looked at him sort of sideways and thought, "There's no way in hell I'm doing that." But I bought my shoes in the following day or a couple of days later, and we walked home. And I remember staggering through the driveway. But it was a real sense of achievement. And then gradually I took that from a walk to a walk run to a jog. And then I used to run home with them after a period of time, right? So, and then I sort of fell in love with running. So, yeah, it's just been a real journey for me. I always grew up loving a lot of sports, but I kind of work got busy, family got busy, and I deprioritized that need for us to actually remain fit and healthy. And and the energy that's given me, and the capacity to be more available and engaged and alert, and to be able to work like I want to work, and to be the father I want to be. Yes. And so no, I'm just really good to have gone through that. But it's one day at a time, Nikki.
So, Kimble, you referenced a 12-step program as a means to help you through those difficult times. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail and maybe specify what was involved there?
Yeah, look, I found a fellowship that does have a 12-step structure to enable us to overcome our challenges that we're facing, and those 12 steps are really powerful. I needed to first of all admit, what was going on was a problem, and ultimately work out that there's a power greater than myself that actually has been looking after me this whole journey, right? So going through, doing some inventory, really understanding what my character defects were. And when I talk about character defects, things like intolerance, impatience, self-pity, selfishness, arrogance, gluttony, whatever those, there's a list that we sort of, in terms of that process that we worked through, and doing some inventory across the whole course of my life enabled me to really understand which of those character defects shone through. And then it's been a process of really perhaps, making sure that I've gone through and looked at my past and made amends where necessary. And today it's a program of maintenance, right? So I have a very structured day in terms of enabling me to remain on that path that I've chosen to tread. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And what do you do? Do you create habits for yourself, like positive habits? Is that how it works? And they just build up and accumulate?
Yeah, look, I stay very close to the community, so that we, and make sure that fellowship is very close. I have relationships with. I help other people through that journey as well, through their early stages of their journey. So there's a service element that comes into that. And I apply a morning mindset. That takes me about eight minutes, I suppose. I think I've roughly timed it to go through. And for me, that starts with making sure I've done firstly, I've got up. Have I done some exercise? Have I done some reading? Have I done some meditation? What are my values? And I write down my 4 personal values every day. So family, respect, faith, and effort. Then I write a quick gratitude list. I write 4 affirmations, which just set me up for the day, making sure that, I'm on the right path. I've got a few personal goals that I'm trying to achieve. So I write down those 3 goals on a daily basis. And then I write my 5 or 6 non-negotiables. So those are the things that I must do today that I can then refer to tomorrow and make sure I've ticked them off, or as I go through the day, just checking in. So I have a really structured morning routine that enables me to really set myself up. I like to start early. That's where I find I'm most creative, and do all of those things that I just mentioned. So life gets busy.
What would happen if you didn't have that morning routine? What would that look like? And maybe not even for yourself, but for people who don't have the rigor and the discipline to go through their day with those check-in points during the day. What happens? What's the outcome?
I guess there's a sense of irritability. I get a little bit discontent, right? And I'm not really set up for the day in terms of what I'm looking to achieve, right? So for me, it doesn't give me enough structure if I don't do it. I'm generally, and this is, I've read a lot around, habits, right? So Atomic Habits, Simon Sinek, and those types of books. I've got a bookshelf full of books, right? So I do a lot of reading, and so I learned that anyone can change any of their behavior if they just stick at it on a daily basis, right? So it generally takes between 75 and 90 days to form a habit, and then it becomes what we know as habitual, right? So I just don't get up in the morning and don't do that now. It just happens, right? So and I really enjoy it. So that's the other thing, is I get a huge amount of satisfaction about setting my day up by doing that morning mindset. And to answer your question, what happens if I don't do it? Well, a degree of uncomfortability and a degree of feeling like I've probably not ticked the boxes that I need to tick to have a successful day, right? So I even do it on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. It just gives me that structure and direction I need and really crave, I guess, to make sure that I'm sticking to the right path. And ultimately, I'm once I've made a commitment to that day, then I can't not do it, right? So that's actually, for me, is motivation.
That's a really interesting concept. You've made a commitment to that day, which means that the outlook is relatively short term. All you have to do is conquer that day, and then you conquer tomorrow, and all of a sudden you've got a really successful week under your belt.
Absolutely.
Because I think where a lot of people fall down perhaps is that they have these long-term goals, and if you fall off track early in the piece or halfway through the piece, it's difficult to reach that goal. But if you have short, concise, achievable goals that you can reach on a daily basis, it's a better key to success, isn't it?
Absolutely. And one of the frameworks we use at Arrowbow is the SMART framework. You're probably familiar with it. So specific, measurable, achievable, results orientated and time bound, right? So actually making sure those objectives are smart enables us to, there's a dopamine hit, right, that we get. So dipping into our natural chemicals in our body that says, hey, look, I've been successful, I've achieved that task, and ticking that off, or crossing that out, or whatever, however you want to manage your task list, is gives you a positive frame of mind and a positive, it releases dopamine, right? And and I like that. So I'll keep doing it while that's happening. So actually, I had a quick catch up with a very wise man yesterday, and he sat me down and he said, "How are you, Kimble?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just feeling a little bit overwhelmed. I've got this massive long list, and my list had become too long." And he said to me, "Have you made your list?" And I said, "Yep." And he said, "Have you prioritized your lists?" And I said, "Yep." And he said, "Do you know the 2-minute rule?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, if anything on that list takes less than 2 minutes, do it now. Doesn't matter what priority number it is." And I really like that. It just gives you momentum. Might be a quick email, might be a quick phone call, it might be a write down, whatever that is. If it takes less than 2 minutes, just do it now and then cross it off. And then suddenly you're underway for the day, right? If you go and grab your highest priority task, which might take you 3 hours, then you're not going to cross it off till 10 and 11 in the morning. You haven't given yourself the opportunity to build momentum. So, this is the thing, right? 50-year-old just learning these little tricks as we go along. I just learned that yesterday. So,
but that valuable nuggets.
Yeah.
How have your experiences shaped you, and how have they prepared you? All the ups and the downs that you've had, how have they prepared you for this current phase of your career, which is Arrowbow? Have they made you a better partner for business?
Absolutely. I certainly believe so. I'm certainly much more focused. I'm certainly very clear on what I want to achieve, and I can, by applying that consistency on a daily basis, then I can really begin to see momentum. I talked about a lifetime of learning, right? So there's your education in life doesn't finish when you leave school or university or finish your first job. It's absolutely, be a sponge for knowledge, be curious. That's one of the key traits of a successful salesperson as well, just being curious. You might have heard of the 5 whys. Why? Just keep going down layers. Why is that happening? Okay, get the answer. Why is that happening? So actually taking the time to be curious. So, and absolutely, as we go through a startup, ultimately, which was Arrowbow was a startup, 18 months ago or so, that journey is pretty daunting. And, what really held me in good stead was having the mental capacity to be resilient, and again, I learned that through sales. So I'm really lucky that I guess some of my area of expertise is in sales, and I've learned so many traits from a mental perspective that's enabled me to be pretty resilient through this early journey of growth as Arrowbow. So the whole growth cycle is pretty lumpy, right? You don't win every day, but we've got to get back up and we go again. The journey that we go on as we grow our businesses isn't linear, right? It can be pretty lumpy, and we have wins and we have losses along the way. But we've got to learn and we've got to grow from those, and everything happens for a reason, right? So, and I like to think, I'll talk to people and maybe you've lost a deal, and I like to use the terminology as one door shuts, another one opens, and sure as nails, the phone will ring, or that lead that you've chased for the last couple of months, suddenly they've made contact with you, or you pick up the phone, that inbound and that outbound. I talked about inbound and outbound earlier on. The inbound, yes, you're attractive because you're knowledgeable and you're experienced and you've got some expertise, and you've got a solution, a product or service that's going to enable to create a positive value exchange. But the other piece is the outbound effort, right? So actually making sure you're picking up the phone and reaching out to those potential customers that line up to your ideal customer profile, have the characteristics that make them attractive partner to you. So, yeah. So when things go quiet, pick up the phone.
Yeah. We could talk about this all day because it's my chosen subject, sales and the science of selling. So there's a huge amount more ground that we could cover, and I'd love to have you back on the podcast at some point to get into those in a bit more detail. However, I'm keen to understand one final thing. Are you on the right track? Are you the person that you want to be now? Are you providing the value that you know that you can provide? And where will Arrowbow and Kimble Willis go to in the next 12, 24 months?
Look, I'm really, really excited about the journey and trajectory that we're on. We've had I guess our second phase of evolution, a rebrand. I've got a new website launching next week with really clear services, and I'm excited about taking those to market because I truly believe they're going to address the needs, add value, or solve solutions, solve problems that my current those future customers face today, right? And sales is such an important function of any business to be successful. We need to generate revenue, and we need to grow that revenue over time. And I really believe what Arrowbow brings to market is right on point. And I'm really, really excited. Like, I've got some awesome initiatives underway that are enabled to us to be more visible in the marketplace. I've been involved in a networking group now for near on 12 months, and I was told, Kimble, you just got to be patient here. You build trust and rapport with this group of people, and things will start to happen. And absolutely, the more work I do, and the great work that Arrowbow does, has shown that referrals, getting a lot more referrals. Things are really starting to ramp up. So I'm really excited. And hey, look, the marketplace that we're operating in today doesn't need to limit us to an ANZ or Australia, New Zealand footprint, which is our current kind of phase one focus. I truly believe that Arrowbow's got a role to play in the global marketplace, and but our primary interest, first and foremost, is helping New Zealand and Australian businesses really take the amazing products and services that they've got to the world. So I just love the customer engagement. I love the human connection, and I love seeing when people get it right. So when that light comes on and they go, oh, so that's what we need to do. And really how we've modeled our coaching and training, and you talked about your experiences with training. Really not just a training room program, right? This is what we bring to market is really what I call a hybrid combination of field and forum. So yes, let's learn the theory, but let's go practice it, learn from it, and then go again. So it's a real journey to sales high performance, and I've just seen businesses transformed, and the really exciting thing is that all of us can learn to be better at this skill that often is quite daunting. So look, I'm really, really thrilled with the progress we've made today, Nikki, and I'm excited for the future, and believe we're well on track to start to knock some of those numbers that we've targeted out of the park. So yeah.
And from a personal development point of view, where are you? Are you happy with who you are now and where you're going, and you've got things under control?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I've just I can't believe it, really, the turnaround that I've had in the last 6 or 7 years, and the much more positive, much more engaged, better person to be around. I'm a better father. I'm a better business person. And I'm genuinely interested in helping others, right? So that for me is how can I be of service? How can I help you? Everything else will look after itself. If I can be of value, if I can help, and I really am quite comfortable in the person I am. I was told by a wise person recently there's 3 things that we need to understand: where we've come from, where we are now, and where we're going in the future. And I'm really clear on those, where I am now and where I'm going in the future. Probably a little bit more discovery around actually where I came from, and that's a lifetime journey, right? So understanding that, but then maybe that's for another day. But I'm starting to really dip into that, because I think we need to understand where we've come from, the growth we have as human beings, right? And that's our lifetime, that's our journey. You know, all of the things that we've learned and harnessed and grown, and, you know, the brain's a pretty amazing thing. It can remember all of this stuff, right? And so where have we come from? Where are we today? I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I've had, you know, and the love I've had from my family and the education I got. That's the other thing. You know, let's not take education for granted. You know, we're very lucky if you've got an education, grab that, or an opportunity to be educated, grab that with both hands and hold on to it tight, because that's such an enabler for future, you know, personal satisfaction, prosperity, all of the things, and satisfaction, right? And I'm really on this journey to try to find true happiness, right? And so how can we be happy every day? How can we be joyful, and how can we impart that on others? So that's for me, that's my journey.
Yeah, well, look, I've learned loads this morning, Kimble, your evening, and I really appreciate you jumping on. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, whether it's somebody going through difficult times and they need a little bit of advice or a little bit of steering from you, or if it's a company looking for assistance on the Sales Accelerator program, how do people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so Kimble Willis. You'll find me on LinkedIn. We have the Arrowbow website, which is going 2.0, which is going live next Tuesday. So look out for that. So www.arrowbow.co.nz, or feel free to reach into Nikki, and more than happy. I'll give you my mobile number, and you can reach out to me anytime. More than happy to have any conversation around anything that's going on in your world.
Wonderful stuff, Kimble. Thank you. And I have a suspicion that this may not be the end. It may just be the beginning. So thank you very much for joining us on the show, and look forward to catching up soon, Kimble.
It's been a real pleasure, Nikki, and thanks for having me. And I wish you all the best over there in Ireland. And great to chat. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Nikki Hughes Show. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with your friends. It really helps us to grow and reach more amazing people like you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to connect with us on social media or visit our website at nikkihughes.com. You can also follow the show's updates and get in touch with today's guest through our socials. Make sure to join us next week, where we'll be getting to know another legend from the world of business. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep uncovering the gold in everyday stories.